Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, we're going to go fast, go fast, go fast. It's time to review the changes to the Raider Ascendancy, because after all, no hunt is complete without the gunning and the skinning. I love that flavor text. Now, the Raider has an entire identity built around going fast, fast, fast. And there's lots of cross synergies between the different nodes in the tree, so we'll discuss that quickly. But firstly, I want to say that this Ascendancy probably actually competes the most with the Deadeye and the Berserker, which are the other two Ascendancies dedicated to getting fast attacks and to, just basically fast clear speed. And there are two main options that you can go with when you're building a Raider. Firstly, you can go with with more speed so that you hit faster, or you can try to be more defensive by building around both speed, because movement speed is a very powerful defense in this game, but also dodge and evasion tanking. So that means that you try to make it so that you are not often being hit by enemies. And, if enemies swing at you, it's like miss, miss, miss. Oh, fuck, that hurt. Miss, miss, miss. Ouch. Oh, miss, miss, miss. Especially with evasion, the way that evasion works in this game. If you have quite a lot of evasion, it's a solid defense. And evasion has an entropy system that basically normalizes it so that you don't get lucky streaks or unlucky streaks. Generally speaking, if an enemy is going to hit you one time in 8 that it attacks you, it will actually hit you on every 8th attempt, on every 8th attack. Rather than, for instance, if you were to take 1,000, if the enemy was to take 1,000 swings at you, and its chance of hitting you was 1 in 8, you would actually be very surprised if you did not have at least one string of 4 successful hits on you in that 1,000 attacks. So those sorts of things with evasion mean that it's a more solid defense than a lot of people give it credit for. And the Raider has a lot of buffs to being hard to hit from both gaining dodge. Dodge does not have this entropy, this sort of randomness protection, but also evasion, which does. So the default synergies that I would say exist for this tree, there are elemental attacks and there is Herald of Agony. These are the two that come to mind. However, there's certainly more options. It's a very general purpose ascendancy. Much like Berserker or Slayer, just work with almost all attack skills. Berserker slightly more of a focus on the physical. Raider can work with almost anything. Now, every single node on the tree, I believe, has been buffed. I'm not going to look at how much they've been changed, just at what they've become, because Raider was very niche before. It wasn't very good, and so we're not updating existing Raider builds, generally speaking, where we're going to expect to find players playing Raider for the first time. Now, first up, you can see that there are 3 fundamental paths. There is this path here, which is dedicated to frenzy charges. There is this path here, which is dedicated to phasing, and then there is this path here, which is dedicated to onslaught. Each of these paths provides ways of getting that mechanic, and also synergies for having it. Now, because phasing is objectively the weakest of those mechanics, phasing, if you're not familiar, it allows you to move through enemies. Phasing is the weakest, whereas frenzy charges and onslaught are both powerful by default. And so that means that the nodes offer a little bit more in the phasing side of things. So it gives more damage, which it needs to, for those nodes to be compelling choices. So let's have a look firstly at the first path, which is the frenzy charges side of things. Now note that whilst with the Saboteur Ascendancy, if you've watched my video on that, I've said that basically you pretty much need to either go all the way to the end of the traps side or all the way to the end of the mines side. Here, you definitely can mix and match. It is perfectly viable to take, for instance, just Way of the Poacher from the Frenzy Charge side, to take just Quartz Infusion from the phasing side, and then to take the entirety of the Onslaught side. So, the first thing that I need to point out on the Frenzy Charges side is that the minor nodes offer 20% increased Frenzy Charge duration. This is... I don't like the term quality of life when it's used in talking about nodes, power increases on a game, but this really is more of a quality of life change. It will actually help you quite a bit. Frenzy charges won't time out that often, but it will help you ensure that when you go into a room with a boss that's sort of in an awkward spot in a big room, and Palace Dominus comes to mind here as the best example of this, that you will be able to get to the start of the fight. You're more likely to still have your frenzy charges up at the start of the fight, which is important. So, Way of the Poacher, node number 2 here. Way of the Poacher does a couple of things. Firstly, it generates frenzy charges, and it's just an excellent standalone node because pretty much every build can benefit from frenzy charges. Unless you're spending frenzy charges fast, it's going to keep you at full in most situations, except for the start of an instance or an unusually long boss phase transition or something like that. So, for instance, you wouldn't have it at the start of some of the fights that just take the longest to get going. So you're getting attack speed, you're getting frenzy charges on kill, but very importantly, you're getting frenzy charges when you hit rare and unique enemies. This is great. It means, while you're clearing, you'll have full frenzy charges from kills, but when you're fighting a boss or something harder, you're going to then end up getting this benefit. Plus, as well as that, you've got your +1 to maximum frenzy charges. All around, very powerful node, Way of the Poacher, and completely justifiable to take this as your only frenzy charge node. Do note that if you're playing a physical attack build, Blood Rage will also fill a lot of this. You're probably using Blood Rage on a physical attack build, and a lot of the effects from Way of the Poacher, i.e. sustaining full frenzy charges most of the time, you would actually be able to get them by using Blood Rage as well. So that's going to be a decision you have to make. Maybe you'll decide that although you like the look of these frenzy charge nodes, you're happy just to go with Blood Rage. That said, I do think that you're probably not going to be playing physical attack builds as raiders very often. So now let's have a look at Avatar of the Slaughter. This just makes your frenzy charges better, and it makes them a lot better. A lot better. So let's have a look. If you only have 4 frenzy charges, this is 12% movement speed while at full frenzies, 12% attack speed, and 32% increased attack damage. That's pretty solid, but it's not remarkable, and it's not going to be as good as some other options in general. So I don't recommend this node if you've only got 4 frenzy charges, the 3 baseline plus the one from Way of the Poacher. However, if you have 9 frenzy charges on your build, for instance, then I feel that this is a completely mandatory node to take. And I want to talk quickly about how you would go about stacking frenzy charges. So the first option is from nodes on the passive tree. It may be an option to anoint amulets and pick one of these up that you're nowhere near as well, but I feel that the opportunity cost of doing that will be too high. I think you will be able to go for a considerably more powerful node than just +1 frenzy charges, even if you have strong synergies with frenzy charges. So for that reason, I don't think people will generally do that. Corrupted gloves with item level 60 or higher can get +1 to maximum frenzy charges, and so you may want to consider that, especially if you're using relatively cheap gloves like the Harim Sorrow elemental conversion gloves. Then in that case, perfectly reasonable to Val as many sets as is necessary of Harim Sorrow in a trade league in order to pick up one that is a +1 to maximum frenzy charges. Do remember, of course, that there are other corruptions that you might find better for your build, like curse enemies with something on hit. So maybe you end up deciding that you'll forego these ones because the opportunity cost is too high. If you're a standard player, there are some legacy items that predate the Incursion League changes to Val corruptions that could get frenzy charges in other slots as well. These are not available in the game anymore and will not exist in the Blight League. Then there's the Dark Ray Vector Boots, and there is the Precursor's Emblem. Precursor's Emblem is an item I want to take a quick side note to talk about. And the reason for this, it's somewhat of a little known item because it comes from selling 3 of the Delve unique rings to a vendor. 1 Meadow ring, 1 Mountain ring, and 1 Valley ring. So you'll see here's Uzaza's Meadow, Uzaza's Mountain, Uzaza's Valley. And Uzaza's Valley here only drops from All. All is the hardest of the Delve bosses. Most players are not able to kill this boss, and he's also quite rare. He's rare enough that unless you're quite a Delve enthusiast, you probably won't see him in the mines at all. So, when you sell these rings, there are 3 different meadow rings, 3 different mountains, and 3 different valleys. And for each one of them, each combination, so there's Uzazas and there's 2 others, they have a bonus to dexterity, or to strength, or to intelligence, and that will then impact what the final result ends up being. Here I'm suggesting that you would sell 3 of the Uzaza rings. So that is the Uzaza's Meadow, which is from the uncommon boss, the Uzaza's Mountain, which is from the more common boss, and the Uzaza's Valley, which is from all. If you sell 3 of them that all give dexterity, then you'll wind up with a Sapphire ring, and that Sapphire ring will have it'll have 20 dexterity, it'll have 5% maximum energy shield, 5% life, and then it will have 3 mods that are specific to frenzy charges. And these mods are pretty powerful. You can see, just having a quick flick over at the current Legion League trade lists, there's a number of them up for sale at very high prices, some of which may be right, some of which may just be people being a little bit too ambitious in their prices. So there's a number of them that are listed for a mirror each. There's a couple that are in the many dozens of exalts, and then they sort of go down from there. As you see, they'll have a whole bunch of different different mods on them, which are of varying power. But some of these are incredible. +1 to maximum frenzy charges is amazing. 1% physical damage reduction per frenzy charge is amazing. Then there's things like pretty much permanently have onslaught, is amazing. And then there's much more niche things like you have iron reflexes while at maximum frenzy charges, which I think for most people is not particularly desirable. But all told, there are lots and lots and lots of very powerful options that can be found on a Precursor's emblem. And a good Precursor's emblem can be a sort of a whole of league goal to earn, because buying Uzaza's Valley typically costs 3 exalts at the moment. So basically it's going to be something that you'd be turning in a lot of them, hoping to get a magnificent one. Ultimately, it is the delve equivalent of the Watcher's Eye unique jewel, and it's a very powerful item that you can certainly have a lot of fun with if you're able to get yourself a great one. So that aside is because, of course, frenzy charges are just so core to an Avatar of the Slaughter Raider's identity that ring, with all of its synergies with frenzy charges, just needs to be something you consider. Okay, so that's our frenzy charges and our frenzy charges wing, Avatar of the Slaughter, and our quick digression into the Precursor's emblem out of the way. Let's have a quick look at the phasing wing. So I just want to note that the minor nodes here give considerable evasion and movement speed. Again, this is really solid. Evasion rating, even though it's only 15%, evasion can be a very real defense that you can get a lot of. And if you get 10,000, you'll notice that you're being missed a lot. If you can get 40,000 or 50,000, then you will be missed a hell of a lot. It'll be really significant defense for you. So, with all that in mind, let's have a look. Quartz Infusion. So, 40% increased elemental damage is solid but unspectacular. 10% chance to dodge attack hits is incredible if you are stacking dodge, and solid even if you aren't. Now, dodge and evasion are separate mechanics. Evasion is the one that has the randomness smoothed out of it. Dodge is completely random, so that means you will get lucky streaks and you will get unlucky streaks, and those unlucky streaks can get your character killed. So you'll need to be aware of that when you're using, if you're relying heavily on dodge. But dodge is a very powerful defense that you can stack. Now, you pretty much have phasing all the time. You don't actually have it all the time, but between the last 3 lines of this, I think you can just say that yes, you do have it all the time. When you kill an enemy or when you interact with one of the other trees. So if you get Way the Poacher to fill up your frenzy charges, or if you get Onslaught from the first node, from the Rapid Assault node on the Onslaught wing. So with all that in mind, Quartz Infusion basically means you pretty much always have phasing. Phasing is quite nifty, and there's a lot of places where it truly shines. In the Delve Mines, if you ever do darkness farming, which feels like a really... it feels almost like cheating, but basically you set up a character with very low hit points. The reason for the low hit points is so that the darkness incoming damage is very low. And then you go into areas that are as yet unexplored in the Delve Mines, and you just search for fossils that are out in the open and available, and you loot them. Generally speaking, it's something that requires... It's fairly hard to do, but it is very powerful. And phasing is incredible doing that. So, with all of that in mind, that's Quartz Infusion. I think it's fairly solid. It's unspectacular. And then we go to Avatar of the Veil. Avatar of the Veil is a node that does a lot. So it gives you move speed while phasing. And remember, we're just going to assume that you are almost always phasing at this point, except at the very beginning of a fight, which is going to be important with the elemental elements. So 10% increased movement speed while phasing is great. 10% move speed is always good. And you've also got 4% from some of these minor nodes around the area as well. So if we have a look at the minor nodes nearby, 4% move speed and 4% move speed. So you are going fast at this point. You're immune to elemental ailments while phasing. Now, this is something that is both strong and also something that is not quite as strong as you might think it is. The reason for that is that the one time you're not phasing necessarily is at the start of an encounter. You may not have Onslaught. Now, I will take this back if you've gone and... well, even with Rapid Assault, you may not have Onslaught quite all the time. So yeah, it will be the case that sometimes you will not have phasing, and the first hit that you take from a boss, if that boss has added cold damage, it may freeze you, and then at that point you'll be feeling pretty sorry for yourself. So, don't rely on the immunity to elemental ailments while phasing. It's not quite always up, and that's unfortunate. 10% chance to dodge spell hits while phasing. This pretty much will always be up in practice, because I expect you'll be at full frenzy charges once you've been fighting the boss for a little while, and by that point, you know, it'll help you hit the 75% dodge cap for spell hits, which is very hard to hit, but is very powerful if you can get there. And even if you can't get there, it's a solid defense. Now, nearby enemies have 15% fire, cold, and lightning exposure while you have phasing. So that is 15% reduction to their resistances to those elements, but it is also important to note that this does not stack with other sources. So with other sources of exposure. This is solid, but I think you can probably get exposure from other sources just as well on a lot of builds. So for instance, if your character is dealing fire damage, then you could consider a Scorching Ray Spell Totem, which will also inflict 25% exposure on most things. You can also set up around a cast while damage taken Wave of Conviction setup is another option that can sometimes be used to inflict that exposure. Now here's the big line that is really, really, really easy to underestimate. Nearby enemies have 15% less accuracy rating while you have phasing. Now, nearby enemies is basically any monster that can hit you in melee, plus most monsters that are on your screen that are firing ranged attacks at you. Reducing enemy accuracy rating actually helps you more than increasing your evasion by that amount, and considerably more. I was having a quick look at some numbers on this, and it's my estimate that if you've got 10,000 or more evasion, this should result in you taking about 10% less hits. So it's surprisingly powerful. It's not an absolutely amazing defensive node like the Saboteur's blindness node, but it is pretty solid. And I think it's one of the compelling reasons to consider going the Avatar of the Veil route, is if you want to be a dodge and evasion type tanky. If you want to defend your character via dodge and evasion stacking, then this is a powerful way to do it. Overall, I suggest that you only consider taking this tree if you are using purely elemental skills, or if you are using dodge and evasion tanking. And dodge evasion tanking has been very strong historically with Herald of Agony. Not many people do it, but the Raider certainly does excel at it. get your dodge to 75%, your spell dodge to nearly 75%, and then get an evasion in the 30,000 range or so, and you'll hardly take any damage when you hit. And there's someone who produced a video at some point in the past of them killing quite a deep all. I think it may have been at Delve Depths 900 or so, where they took several hits, but none of them, like any of these hits would have killed their character. They were struck several times by all's attacks, but every time the dodge and evasion kicked in and kept them alive. So that was an interesting video to watch. I wish I could find it, but unfortunately I'm not sure where it is at the moment. It's very hard to find old Reddit posts, unfortunately. So we now have the Onslaught wing of the tree. So this is this little part here, which covers all of the nodes that deal with Onslaught. Now this is all around good stuff, and this wing is powerful now. So first up, we have the minor nodes. 15% increased evasion rating is nice. 15% increased onslaught effect is basically 3% move speed, 3% attack speed, and 3% cast speed. That is good. So, Rapid Assault. 20% increased attack damage is nice. 5% chance to evade attacks, again, dodge, evasion, tanking, and move speed is a defense as well. 10% chance to gain onslaught for 10 seconds when you hit a rare or unique enemy, and a guaranteed gain of onslaught for 10 seconds after a kill. This is really powerful. This is not quite you always have onslaught, but it is as close as you're going to get to you always have onslaught without legacy synthesis boots. This is going to have probably 95% uptime in your mapping, and it's also going to have, when you're fighting a boss, it'll be on every time that you hit the boss. Like it'll be permanent uptime except in weird situations, and except maybe for the first couple of seconds of the fight. But after that, you've got it all the time. Rapid Assault is a very, 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 very strong node. So essentially, you're dealing with 23% increased attack speed, 23% increased cast speed, and 23% increased movement speed from these two nodes alone. Really strong. Something that, yeah, I think it's hard to build a raider without taking this node. And I think Avatar of the Chase is also similar. It's another 23% speed to everything, to your actions and to your movement. And that comes from, 20% from this 100% increased onslaught effect, and 3% more speed from this increased onslaught effect. And sorry, I said more speed, I meant increased speed there. As well as that, Avatar of the Chase does more. 30% increased attack damage during onslaught is great, and 30% more chance to evade melee attacks and projectile attacks during onslaught. That one, I'm not exactly sure how that works in practice. I think I need to research how that actually works. I'm just assuming that it is a solid upside, but even without that text, Avatar of the Chase would be worth taking. So there are a lot of compelling choices on the Raider tree now. I want to suggest that you start out by taking 2 points into Frenzies and 4 points into Onslaught early. Then stockpile Regret Orbs, because this is such a flexible Ascendancy that you will be changing around how you've set up as you get your hands on various pieces of gear. So for instance, if you are able to acquire an excellent Precursor's Emblem, then at that point you might decide that you absolutely have to take Avatar of the Slaughter at that point. And so you may have started out with Quartz Infusion and then decided, no, I'm going to unspec from Quartz Infusion and pick up Avatar of the Slaughter. You need to use 5 Regret Orbs for each Ascendancy point you want to unspec, remember, so that means that changing one major node will in most circumstances cost you 10 Regret Orbs. Not a huge amount, like it's something that is meaningful if your character... It's a meaningful cost if your character is, say, level 70, but by the time you're level 85, it's a trivial cost. So, let's talk about some of the decisions. Do you go Deadeye or do you go Raider on a projectile build? Now, Deadeye has 2 ridiculous nodes. Tailwind is probably better than any individual node that the Raider gets, and Ricochet is incredibly powerful on skills that don't inherently chain, but can. And when I say incredibly powerful, I mean blatantly overpowered. This goes to the point that these nodes are so strong that I feel that Deadeye is the objective only correct choice on a build like Elemental Hit or Tornado Shit at the moment. Raider has not caught up in general, but with some gear combinations such as Gloomfang or Shaper Bows, it might. For skills that don't gain as much from Ricochet, Raider may very well be competitive. Now, on the other side of things, Raider versus Berserker for melee builds. Berserker is also a speed demon. Raider will be tankier because of the dodge and evasion, even though the Berserker may have a bit more access to life nodes, and it may hit faster because of all of the frenzy charges. I suggest that you choose Berserker for all physical melee builds, and consider Raider seriously for elemental conversion builds. So, a couple of potential build ideas. These are not fleshed out builds yet, they're just ideas. You could go Frostblades with Herald of Ice. Take the Onslaught tree, take the Phasing tree, and then consider respecing to the Frenzy Charge tree, dropping the Phrasing Wing, when and if you're able to acquire 2 excellent Frenzy Charge Precursor emblems. And a second possible build idea, take the Rain of Arrows skill gem, and fully convert it to elemental damage. This is done by attaching it to physical to lightning support, which will convert 50% of the damage of the gem to lightning damage, and then finding 50% more conversion from somewhere else. Harimsaro gloves are an excellent choice, but they're not the only one. You can find various sources on the passive tree of elemental conversion that you can then use in conjunction with a crafted with the Veiled mod that provides 20 to 25% elemental conversion. And this should have a lot of options for improving the gear throughout the league. So early on, you'll start using crappy little Harimsaro gloves or the upgraded version Harimburn, and you will be using them alongside physical to lightning support and pretty mediocre gear. Later on, you'll be able to pick up something. Ultimately, you want to aspire to owning a Queen of the Forest for clearing and an Eternity Shroud for bosses, both of them 6-linked, and the Eternity Shroud maybe even with some juicy corrupted implicits on it for more damage. And due to the fact that you're a range build, you will not get full value from phasing. And what I mean by that is that you may not be near all of your enemies for this Rain of Arrows setup. So for that reason, you're not going to get value from this. Nearby enemies have less accuracy rating, and nearby enemies have phasing. So for that reason, you may wish to instead go the Onslaught and the Frenzy Charge route. That's my initial thoughts on the Raider Ascendancy. I'm looking forward to it, and I think I may end up playing it, although I've not yet made a decision for certain. It looks like it offers a lot at both low, medium, and at high gear levels, and it will also be a very fun Ascendancy just to zip around really, really fast, basically zooming around just zooming around like absolutely mad. So, I hope you have a good one. That's all I've got on the radar, and I'm looking forward to designing some builds when the skill gems information comes out and the balance manifesto over the next week.